Okay, so updates. The first important update is there've been a lot of air balloons, and I think it's a very appropriate euphemism for the way the world is right now. There's a lot going on in the open, but even more importantly is what is going on underneath the surface. Whenever these days I see that the media is so busy with one story, I usually go and search for stories which are very hard to come by the way, of one of these rogue states. For example, for those who live in East Africa, the US made a raid on some of the leaders of across Africa. Actually, they've made a raid of some of the leaders of ISIS, Al-Shabaab, whatever they call themselves, and they've lost some very important leadership. Recently, there have been some alerts issued by the West against some African countries, especially East African countries, and worldwide is where the drama really is, and where I think we need to be careful, because there's so much to distract, because there's so much happening that what's important to one person will not be important to another. As we approach the end of this season, and powers are fighting for a spot on the dining table, and also the population is under attack from various kinds of viruses. One day it's corona, the other day it's bird flu. I've had Marburg the other day has appeared in Equatorial Guinea. There's I think there was Ebola some days ago, until recently in Uganda. And in China, the last time that we checked on China, and that was before the balloon and all that, they had a white lung syndrome. Nobody knows how far that's gone, but after 2 years, after 2020, 2021, 2022, around 3 years of constant zero policy from the Chinese government, which meant that most of them were on lockdown for most of the time. It meant that the mutation that was going on around the world was different from what was going on within China, because it was an isolated population. So when they came out with a very serious variant. God knows if it's a variant or something else. So that is China. And the last time we checked, when the media was on China, we were losing a lot of the aged populations. We were losing a lot of the senior citizens who are getting infected and so forth. The white lung syndrome, which was associated with the pandemic in China especially, was responsible for most of the casualties, and also a lot of the things were still being understood. So apart from that, with a lot of casualty, there was also something going on in the two countries that have decided to go at each other, which are also consuming most of the media attention and the money. The international let's say the efforts of the UN is mostly concentrated on the U versus R. So that's Asia. There's the Pakistan issue, which when we left, one of the leaders had been deposed. They were just recovering from a very deadly flood system. I doubt they have already recovered because of how intense it was. There was also Afghanistan was also going through a similar thing with an earthquake. Then recently we hear Turkey. So it's been a flood of natural disasters, especially earthquakes. Extreme. There was a time where in China there was extreme cold, extreme weather events generally. At the same time, the weather seems to be more and more unpredictable, of course, with the exception of those of us who live in areas which have been perpetually depraved in terms of rain. We barely have enough rain for any season, so especially in the Horn of Africa and in the north of Africa. So with the exception of those two areas, the rest of the areas have dealt with either excessive or very little. There was also an incident of a flood, which was what we call a free flood, which happened in Uganda, in which the flood suddenly carried everything on a hilly area. They carried livestock, they carried houses. I doubt that they've recovered because it was just a few days ago. Now, a lot have been happening, and I've been making it, taking it upon myself to search for what else is happening that is not really up in the media. And one of the things that I've come across is the tests, the military tests and military exercises being conducted by the friends of Russia. First of all, Russia itself. Now, Russia had a ship that was to go the length from the Black Sea, through the Red Sea, down to the Atlantic, around the Cape of Good Hope, and to the Indian Ocean, where they were supposed to launch a supersonic nuclear capable weapon. So nobody knows what happened of that because it was suddenly overshadowed by the balloon. Around the same time, the country of which I'll censor, but it's IRAN. I'm censoring it for YouTube, which doesn't like it. That country was also trying to, I'd say, to provoke the powers that be by also venturing into new places in the waters. Remember, this country has been giving the countries of the world of the status quo a lot of problems, especially in the waters. Now they've been giving this trouble mostly in the Indian Ocean and around the Persian Gulf. So this time they decided to venture out into the Atlantic through the Panama Canal. So that's where we last heard of it. It was entering the Panama Canal. I don't know if it got through, if there was a confrontation, or nobody knows what happens. But it's one of the significant things that have not been captured by the media. So we still are in the middle of the variants, and we're still being told to expect even more harsher ones, and as usual, and we've been promised also harsher climates. So it's important to not lose sight of the fact that we're in the last days, and by the last days I mean the last days. Most people will not, for most people this will be the last days on Earth because of all the things that are happening, just the natural disasters that are happening. If you put them all together, you add the outbreaks and the pandemics, you add them to the earthquakes, the freak weather occurrences, add them to the wars, and everything that just bloomed in this season. A lot of people are actually breathing their last, and it's important to recognize this, especially for nations which are not yet deep. Before I forget, there was an incident in the US the other day where a train derailed and it had some chemical in it. Now the authorities decided to do a controlled burning to limit or to break down the chemical agent so that it's less toxic on the environment. Now that resulted to another secondary issue with the spread of the fumes by the air. So it's a big story, not really in the media, but especially in the backstories, in the YouTubes and the Twitters, and other behind the scene stories that the media, the mainstream media, is not really keen on following. One thing you should learn about mainstream media is that they're very careful about the kind of content or the effects of the content that they're putting out, because it's capable of turning the emotions of an entire nation into whatever. Remember the story of Rwanda, where the population was incited using a radio, which incited one tribe against, I believe it was the Hutus were incited against the Tutsi, and I believe over 1 million people were massacred. And this hatred was fueled by a very local radio station which called, so the powers that be are aware of the kind of power that the media is, and that's why there's a lot of control on the media. Sometimes I do understand, because if you've been living in this world for a few years, you know that not everybody should be trusted with information or with the truth, especially if the truth is likely to result to their disadvantage. So that's what the media is doing. It's not about freedom of this and freedom of that. That world has come to an end. Remember, this is a world that was created just 100 days ago, with the inception of the inception of especially the human rights agenda, the inception of the American Constitution, which introduced the concept of the Bill of Rights, and what they called the inalienable human rights. Before that, there had been hints in the European system that eventually culminated in the American system, which decided to base their system on that concept. So it's a system that has been around for less than 500 years. So don't hold on to it for too much, because everything that has a beginning has an end. And considering the imperfections of the system, where it wasn't, we weren't so sure whether these systems were actually for everybody, or it was possible for them to be enforced with the institutions that were created for the same, because a lot of it depended on the goodwill of the people, and for many countries the will was not there, so it was on paper, and very little was going to the grassroots, and for also even the countries which seem to really have it under control, it led to over legislation, to the extent that the legislation was undoing actually what the Constitution, which had established the rights and the freedoms and the responsibilities of the state really were meant to do, because in the multitude of regulation and in the multitude of rules and laws, what you end up with is a concept whose enforcement is shut off by all these regulations and red tape. It also leads to oppression, because with the red tape comes privilege, and those who can cross into the red tape are fewer by the day. And with the increase of population, no wonder there's been an explosion in the occurrences of narcissism and narcissistic personalities. It's because the systems, by their designs, end up excluding, which by design will teach men that the world is not big enough for all of us, so we have to bring others down in order to succeed, and which led to a lot of destruction and a lot of the darkness that is currently part of our society is actually from this competition that has been created by systems that just don't do what they claim to be doing. And this is why they will not make it. They will not make it. Nothing, because of the imperfection and because of the distraction and the vengeance that which comes from the karma that it has attracted to itself. The system, there's no way that the system would go beyond this, because we're in a new season. New powers are coming into play, so watch. What you need to concentrate on is what the media has left in the back burner. Because one thing you should expect about the media, because of the importance in the society, they will not jump on a narrative whose end they're not sure of. So the narrative that has been neglected is the narrative that you should look out for. It's the narrative that will end up making a big difference, because its existence is outside of our current system.